Good morning, and thank you, Marilyn, for the introduction. I may ask my speakers on stage, please, which is Maria Leptin, our president of ERC, which is a large funding organization giving out the most prestigious awards these days in Europe. Welcome, good to see you. Well, just if you take a seat right here. Then we have Antoine Petit, who is heading CNRS. I think it's actually the largest public research organization in Europe that we have, out of France, of course. Yes, please take your seat. And Söderholm, who is president of KTH, the leading research and teaching university in Stockholm, of course, very well known to all of us. And Ed Bringsma sends his best regards. He, unfortunately, for personal reasons, was not able to make it today, but was going to be with us in spirit, I'd say. Good. Let me very quickly set the stage before we dive into the details, and that is, simply speaking, science and research gave us the powers, if you will, to expand and increase wealth and do all the things we do, but it also gave us the powers to live beyond our means, quite obviously. Technology, at least. Science turned into technology that allowed for the way of life we have today, and that apparently isn't sustainable, hence the title of the panel. So the question is science also the force that's going to bring us back into an expansion of life, into a style of living that respects planetary boundaries, in a sense, in a just and equitable way, I think, as everybody wants to emphasize today. And so that's the main theme we're going to explore. There's probably many opportunities to link back to what was discussed previously this morning. And please feel free to do so, right? Respond to things you have heard. Otherwise, I've prepared my set of questions, which is going to guide us through this. And so towards the end of this session, maybe in about 25, 30 minutes or so, again, like Marilyn did, think of questions you may have, comments you want to make, and then bring them up, and we can feed them into our discussion here on the podium. So, again, a warm welcome to all three of you. And I would actually like to start with Maria and say, fundamental research has a tradition of being highly specialized. I mean, some critics might say siloed, and others might say, well, it's just depth over breadth, at least on the fundamental research side. The question is that still the right model for today? Or do we have to change the way we think about what science does for the better good of humanity, and do we have to organize it differently? As a funding body, I think that's something which, of course, you have a way to steer, to an extent at least. Give us your broader picture of the situation. Is there a paradigm shift, as the title here suggests, or don't you see that yet?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me here, and it's always good fun to talk about fundamental science, basic science, frontier science, whatever term you want to use for it. And by the way, let's be clear, the ERC funds frontier science. That is not necessarily always this siloed work you mentioned, or the ivory tower that one mentions. It's pushing the frontiers of knowledge. That can be in engineering or in the medical sciences. So just to get that distinction clear, what matters is finding out new stuff. And I think that's absolutely essential. There is no point in doing science if you don't find out new stuff. If it's already known, it's not new, it's not frontier. Is it siloed? I think that depends on how you look at it. If you push the frontiers, you cannot push on a whole front. You have to probe one place, make a breakthrough there. That's why it's called breakthrough. You push in one place, put all your efforts there, and that opens up new avenues. So yes, I think that's completely essential. And that is not to say that there shouldn't be funding mechanisms to also bring people together, to find ways of exploiting these breakthroughs and getting people to realize, and by the way, scientists are great at realizing what's happening elsewhere and employing it for their own use. But there should be mechanisms to use that. And the European Union is great at doing that. We have the European Innovation Council. ERC itself has a mechanism that allows people who've made such breakthrough discoveries and think they could be applicable, it's called proof of concept grants, to support them in taking this to market and bringing them together. So it really needs both. You can't just say, we'll take everything we know and somehow piece it together and forget about discovering novelty. So I really think we meet both, and Europe does that quite well.
So let me follow up on, because and I'm going to get asked that question probably to everybody, if we take the science of sustainability, is a little unclear what that actually means, right? So do you think there is a new way to connect things to address this? I mean, fundamentally, you might say sustainability is a way of life rather than a scientific challenge. So it touches upon so many different things. Is there a way to tie it together in a more compact form and say, like, well, it's not going to come out of the ideas that people have bottom up, but it has to have some overarching framework that's being defined? So that, I mean, fundamentally, directing R&D activities way more than just waiting for the bottom-up activities.
I said, yes, there should be ways of tying things together, but actually scientists are very good at doing that themselves. And let us remember, it's not politicians who told scientists about, maybe looking at the universe and seeing if we have climate change. Do you know when the first recognition that there had to be something like a greenhouse effect was? How old that is? It was in the 20s. In the 1820s, not in the 1920s, etc. It was scientists who discovered that. It's for scientists by the woman, Eunice Newton, who discovered the role of CO2 in the middle of the 19th century. And scientists warned, first in 1936 and then in 1988, of the dangers. So, and they just discover it through pure thinking, in one case, Fourier, about the greenhouse effect. So they do it anyway. And I've seen this as a panel chair on the synergy panels that the ERC funds. These are grants that go to several people, several independent researchers who want to solve a problem together. So we do fund that. And I've seen them look at stuff that people who would give directives hadn't even thought about, because they recognize there's a new way of looking at DNA. You can look at far more. There are new computer-based algorithms for comparing data. They get together just because it's actually fun. And they're citizens too, so they have an interest. So that's about climate change. I'm not even going to get going on food, on what we could have done had politicians decided in Europe to do more about exploiting what we can do with modified genetic organisms.
Thank you. So that's the content side in some sense. Like what do we pick as subjects to work on? But there's also the structural side of it. And I stick to my provocative statement around the silos and everybody going deep rather than naturally broad, irrespective of connections that people individually make. Now, if you're running a large research organization with all its many institutes, right, do you think about how to organize that differently, how to position it differently, facing quite immediate threats right now, where scientists are probably being asked to provide answers and say, well, I mean, are you even organized for success in that context? Give us an idea how that goes, that discussion is at CNRS.
Okay, with pleasure. But just before, I would like to comment your point about science of sustainability, because it's related to your question. I don't like the expression science of sustainability, because I think we let think to the politician or to the citizen that you have science of sustainability, science of COVID, science of I don't know what. I think there are science for something. And the raison d'être of CNRS is basic research for society. And it means that we do the same research. It's not true that we do different research now than 10 years or 20 years ago. Let us recall that the first IPCC report dates from 1990, so 32 years ago. And at this stage, we already work science for sustainability, but we didn't invent the expression science of sustainability. And I think I understand that it's a marketing dimension, but I think it's quite dangerous for scientists to do marketing. They run the risk to lose their soul. But it's true that when we do in CNRS basic research for society, it can be for industrial purposes, it can do for sustainability. I have no problem with that. And clearly, you're right, this needs cooperations. This needs interdisciplinary research, pluridisciplinary research, including humanities and social sciences. But what is clear from my point of view is that you have to take very good people on different subjects and to force them. You can never force researchers to do what they don't want, but you can encourage them to work together. But it means that you need to have people who are very good in their silos, okay? And that's the second condition, to push them to work together. But if you take average people on different subjects, and if you encourage them to work together, nothing very good will happen. So that's why ERC is absolutely fundamental. We need ERC, and as Maria explained perfectly, it does not mean that ERC is just silos. That's not true. We can push people to work together, and I think the synergy ERC is a very good example for that. And it's clear that what we try to do, CNRS is, as you said, CNRS is big. Just to give you some figures, we pay every month something like 32,000 people, and we cover all fields of science. But clearly, how can you push people, or can you encourage people to work together? You cannot say to people from, I take an example different from sustainability just to illustrate what I want to say. You cannot say to people of chemistry and AI, oh, you should work together. They say, oh, yes, no, why? But if you say, oh, deep learning techniques will allow you to have new algorithms to find molecules or to find materials, then they will be interesting on both sides. And that's the same for sustainability. What we try to do is say, I think each of us is concerned by sustainability purposes, and to push people on quite precise subject. It can be, for instance, on sensors, it can be on data processing, and then that's a good idea. And so you have to encourage them. But once again, I don't want to oppose silos or special disciplines and interdisciplinary research needed for sustainability. I think really the two are complementary, and we don't have to forget that sometimes one of our main objectives as scientists is to produce knowledge. And for sustainability, if I come back to the IPCC reports, the first thing that did the IPCC experts was to warn people. And it's not the politician, neither the citizen who say, hey, something seems wrong with the climate. Can you tell us something, you scientists? It's exactly the contrary. So I think we have to pay attention in the preparation of the next programs to not forget that. To let the scientists the freedom to prepare the next crisis or the next challenges that by definition we don't know yet.
Thank you. Stubborn as I am, I stick to my topic of siloing, and I come to understand. I mean, there's another dimension of siloing, namely, this is the scientific disciplines. We organize them in schools or in departments, and that's actually also how education works. So I become a mechanical engineer or a biologist, or I become a mathematician. Now, there's obviously in every study class these days are elements of other disciplines baked into it, at least in anything that is preparing for a job. Right, other than job educational studies that are more really for the fundamentals of the discipline. But you are now at a university, of course, exposed with the young generation. Right. That may ask you, like, are you doing it still the right way? What have you learned? What are you doing differently? Give us a flavor of that dialogue within universities.
Okay, thank you. Before coming back to your question, let me just reiterate what you were saying, Maria, that ERC should be safeguarded for the fundamental research, and that scientists are building in sustainability issues in those research agendas very successfully. So I think that it's important to have that cornerstone still there, doing exactly what it has been done for the years. When it comes to education, I think there is a delicate balance between digging into your subject of study and providing the broader perspective, the broader context into the curricula. And there are several layers of doing that. One is that when you go into your subject, you could always include aspects on how that subject could be used in a context. And that layer, I think, is now vivid and present in most engineering and architectural educational programs. So I think that is well catered for, also because the scientists, when they do science, have that perspective and bring that into the teaching as well. And there are only so many things you can build into a specific curricula. So I think having that ambition on making the students aware of how what they learn actually work together with other disciplines or with the context of broader engineering is one important stuff. Then the other layer would be to see how it comes into social policy, corporate policies, etc. And maybe that is something that could be provided more in a lifelong learning perspective. And I think we do well in terms of bachelor master's degree in including sustainability issues also in the broader perspective. But we do less well in providing lifelong learning opportunities. Let's say that you've been 10 years in the labor market, you come into a management position, maybe you would be welcome back to the university or some corporate training in order to broaden the perspectives and sort of make use of the experience that you have gained during your time on the labor market. And that is a system that is so recently being discussed as part of the sustainability agenda. So if there is something to do, I would say looking at the lifelong learning opportunities and to see what is supposed to be the university's responsibility in that and what can be done by the corporate or business organizations themselves, and how this could be combined into a more of a long-term learning experience for managers, for engineers, architects, once they're out on the market.
Yeah, there is I recall it from some other discussions I had with other universities, the idea of how do we turn ourselves into hubs for further education where our graduates, at least those, right, maybe others too, but at least our own graduates come back regularly. And the thing is, would they even come back and think they get the right inputs, the right training, right? So what would need to change on the side of the universities to make it more attractive? So there's no scarcity of offerings around sustainability and new work and whatnot, right? The technical education on the latest numerical tools, I think that's a separate matter. But more these bigger overarching questions, right? What do you think, and I ask the both of you as well, is what would need to change to give that more emphasis, to make sure that universities are seen as the ones who are pushing an agenda around sustainability or around whatever it may be, but in a lifelong learning context, people come back to those places. What do you think?
The universities need to expand the scope of its business, where having education for the younger generation is one part, but also look into how education could be provided for those that are sort of career changers or that want to expand their knowledge later in life. And it doesn't only have to do with the content of the lifelong learning, it's also how it is provided. Maybe you need to be part-time working, part-time studying. It should be shorter learning sessions, maybe not a full program. And these mechanisms are not yet in place. And I think that is something that needs to be promoted also in order to make the universities to better understand what kind of needs there are that could be provided through university education and what can be done by the business themselves.
All right, let me get back also to or not get back, but follow up on the question of what needs to change. Now, the insiders in the system may feel everything is all right, but the outside world may not. Say like, well, it seems like they're kind of oblivious of the situation. They're just continuing doing what they did. What would need to change in the way how we either organize science in terms of institutions or focus on certain elements of content in frontier science to give a clear signal that science wants to play a major role in solving problems? I mean, highlighting the issue of climate change, I totally agree, right? That came way before its time in some sense. But warning, I mean, ringing the alarm bell is no longer enough. But they said, hey, what answers do you have? What can you do? How do you see that? I mean, really, almost in a sense, like how do you respond to public expectations of scientists playing a more visible, more active role, understanding like, yep, we want to be part of the solution in a very visible way?
Well, I really don't see that and I include myself, I am a basic research scientist and life scientist, that we aren't. You know, I have colleagues at the Max Planck Institute for Breeding Research in Cologne, where they develop plants. They go out endlessly and try to educate. They have, societies. They have charitable foundations. They lobby. I don't know what else is needed. And this is to feed the world. This is not, they're also doing their basic research and trying to find out how plant immunity works, how salt tolerance works. They're going out and doing it. So I think it needs, why is there the perception in the first place that scientists don't care? We do, big time. And, by the way, scientists are members, are citizens as well. So it's in their own interest as well. But many of them see ways of, and want to help society. Not everybody does. Some people are less communicative. They're fantastic at solving, Fermat's theorem and may not have anything to say to the general public, but somebody else will pick that up. And by the way, even in teaching, you asked, are we teaching the right stuff to these people who want to do lifelong learning? I've been a professor for a long time, teaching undergraduates, graduates, etc., postdocs. And what we like teaching most is not the genetics 101. It's the stuff that's new that we heard at the last conference from a colleague that nobody in the press or anywhere else said. We love teaching our students that. And we'd love teaching that to people. So again, it's the individuals who actually care. I'm sorry if I sound like a broken record.
No, that's fine. That's good.
That's how I feel.
You will figure out my reason for asking that with the next question I'm going to ask. Before I come to you, quickly, Anders?
Yeah, I would agree that it's a myth that science doesn't change. It's a myth that universities doesn't change. If you look at the curriculum of today, you wouldn't recognize it if you went 20 years back. And the same thing is true for the disciplines. They grow and they differentiate and they create new subjects, like in biotech, life sciences, take the ICT field. There are so many changes going on. You can always do more, but it's a myth that science stands still on the same place where it has been for hundreds of years.
Yeah, I think, and there's always a lot of mythology around there. I totally agree with you. Now, I want to ask you, Antoine, a question that's kind of a follow-up to what I asked previously, namely, scientists being engaged in the public debate can also create problems of its own, as we saw during the pandemic, right, where the question was, well, what should we do? And then you ask 5 experts, and you get 5 different answers, and the ones who have to make regulation and laws or steer the ship say, like, well, I'm going to pick the one that fits my needs best, and boom, scientists end up in a highly polarized public debate. So I don't think we are there in terms of sustainability overall, although this is an aspect of sustainability. But how do you see that? Sort of how do you maintain almost like this, the values that science stands for if they become much more visible, much more public, and engage in a very visible way?
For me, the key point is that the role of the different actors have to be clear. And I think that scientists should stay humble. And we are part of the solution, but we are not the solution. And it means that we have to explain to people, and in particular to citizens and to politicians, what is the scientific approach, what we know, what we don't know. The fact that on some point we don't agree, it's not a bad sign, it's just a sign that the science is sometimes complicated. And so I think, from my point of view, and it comes back to education. We have to educate people on what is scientific approach, and the fact that there are some things that we do not know is very important also for people. And you cannot ask science to have definitive answers for daily questions. And also it's clear from my point of view that we must pay attention to not make a confusion between scientists and citizens. So each of us as scientists is also by definition a citizen. But when we speak, we should be very precise on with which hat we speak. At some point I speak with a scientist, and I do not have to move as the citizen without clearly saying, okay, at that point, it's not anymore the scientists who speak, but the citizens. And for instance, for the climate change and sustainability question, I think that IPCC tried from the very beginning to say, okay, that's what our models say, but IPCC, I think it never say what people should do. If people want to suicide them, they can. But they will not be able to say, "Well, we didn't know." No, it's not true. We explained to you what will happen following our models. But it's complicated to see the barrier because, as you say, it's not clearly a barrier. I think it's important also to come back to your question to ask institutions more than scientists. I think that if you ask the Max Planck, if you ask a university, what is your opinion on a given subject, it's not the same that if you ask individuals. And I think in each our country during the pandemic crisis, we had pseudo-scientists on TV explaining every day what will happen. And sometimes I think these scientists should go back in their labs and rather than on TV. And that's very important. That at some point we should trust our institutions. And I think it would be good to ask to the ERC, or to the university, or to CNRS, what is your opinion about a given subject, and not to give too much attention to individuals. But of course, I understand it's nicer for journalists to have somebody who explained to you that he will do statistics with 3 people and no link with somebody in Marseille. But
we're going to send them to a lifelong learning class, right? To make sure that they don't do that. But it's, I mean, let's stick with that point for the moment, because I don't know how concerned you are about science in a society that is a lot less, I would say, center-minded, liberal, and all these other things, but in a society that is increasingly polarized. So how do you kind of make sure that the science community understands the threat of exposing itself? I mean, withstanding the temptation of individuals that normally spend their lives in the lab, here comes the TV station, sticks a microphone in the face, like, what do you think about this? Right? This is the moment that some people think they've waited for forever, and then they can't help but just kind of like make comments that maybe from their very individual personal standpoint be quite right, but looking at the grander scheme may be irresponsible. I mean, not that I'm looking to Sweden for the pandemic, and don't worry. But how do you see that, right? I mean, you can't say the university is a guardian of, I would say, rational argumentation and professors. They're independent people in some sense. But at the same time, there is kind of a stewardship for good science that sits with institutions. How do you see that?
Yeah, basically it's a good thing if the society sort of asks for what the science know about different policy areas. But it has to do with academic integrity that follows with academic freedom. And I understand that there is a thin line sometimes between presenting facts based on science and policy suggestions based on the same science. But I think that is something that should be included more profoundly in the PhD training, for example, being able to engage in a debate on the future without doing policy making, because there is a responsibility for the politicians to do that for us, and we ask them to sort of look at the facts before they reach their conclusions. But there are so many areas where, like the energy field, where there are so many different ways of combining the portfolio in a country's energy system. And how that composition should be done and what kind of risks the society are willing to take. That is maybe a political standpoint, whereas researchers could engage in that debate, provide different sort of perspectives and answers as far as we know. So I think it's something that needs to be trained. But the answer is not to not engage in the debate. It's doing that with academic integrity, sort of as a basic knowledge of the researchers.
There's, Maria, there's the concept, or at least I would say the buzzword of responsible research, which indicates that some forms of research are an irresponsible activity and shouldn't be pursued in the first place, while others are having a high degree of responsibility for everybody's well-being. That's kind of like what it indicates. Now, I don't think that there's a catalog of criteria of what that exactly means. But if you look at, the ERC looks at grant proposals or picks out things, how do you bake in that idea of doing the right things and giving them a chance to thrive versus not also, in some sense, exposing an organization too much to something that is highly contested?
Well, first of all, there is a catalogue of things that are doable, allowable, and not. Each country has legislation on what's allowed. Of course, much of it is guided by ethics about what should be done with human life, but also with animal life. And the other side is what risks should the community take in exposing themselves to outcomes of research. Now, we know that there are horrible outcomes. Understanding nuclear physics has got us into deep trouble, but it's not the understanding, it's the application of that. And so it's not easy. If you try to decipher papyrus rolls, you probably won't endanger anyone, nor is there any difficult ethics, except the knowledge that comes out of it. Who is it owned by? That's an ethical problem that people like to forget. But if you work on embryos, that's important. And different countries have different legislation. There's EU legislation on many aspects of this, not on all. And what the ERC does, and I think this is the right thing, it's absolutely the right thing, is check meticulously whether applications abide by national rules. And this goes so far as to regulate, and I think this is correct, collaborations with researchers in countries where the same rules don't apply. That's not allowed. If there are manipulations that are considered unethical in at least one European state, that research may not be funded by EU funding, even if it's done outside our own legislation. I think that's very important. Now, again, people always say, oh, but it changes constantly. Actually, it doesn't change that much because, for instance, embryo research and the ethical consequences of that are not that different from abortion, which has been possible since the beginning of mankind. Well, maybe not quite, but for a very long time. So I think the ethic underpinnings for this are there, and it is up to funders, but also, of course, universities, and we often rely on good local institutions who've done the vetting to do this. And it's very important to explain to the public at all times what are the dangers. Now, even if we do explain that a vaccine that you get into your arm does not have little magnets that go to your brain or will not cause viruses to multiply in your body forever, not everybody wants to hear it. But I think universities and funding institutions are doing a pretty good job in civilized countries to control this and to reassure the public.
Thank you. So let me check if there are any questions. I have a number of questions on myself. Oh, here we go. But I want to give the audience a chance. Somewhere in the back, I can't tell who that is, but okay. Just introduce yourself real quick. Microphones are going through the audio. Okay, there's another question already here in the front.
Hello. Yeah, thank you. I'm Frank from the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. I was wondering, if you look into sustainability, what does this mean for allowable partnerships? So can you work in the previous panel, there was mention of ExxonMobil. Is it still ethical to work with companies like that? Or should we put limits to the partners that we can work with?
So I direct that question to Antoine because you have so many partnerships from institutional level. Maybe you want to comment, and then may have more questions. So just one answer.
Even if we do basic research, we work a lot with industrial partners. We have more than 220 joint structures with industrial partners in which we do basic research, but on subjects defined, co-defined with the industrial partner. And our main partner is Total Energy. Okay? And it's a debate in France and inside the community whether we should continue to work with Total Energy. And I think that Total Energy is a French company, they pay taxes, and who we are to decide that we will stop to work with them. They try to move to new energy, and I think it's also our role to help them. So we have to pay attention, of course, as Maria said, to the ethics rules, and we have an ethics committee for that. But for French companies or even European companies, we continue to work with them. We of course, we pay attention to the subject, and if we have some doubt about a given subject, then we will ask our ethics committee. But we will, in CNRS, we didn't decide, and we will not decide to stop to work with such or such companies. Otherwise, at the end, we will be alone.
Thank you. There was another question here. First here and then here in the front. But there's someone I can not see well.
Hello, Marta Agostinho, Executive Director of ULife, the Alliance of Independent Research Institutes in the Life Sciences in Europe. And we have been talking about the responsibility of individual researchers and also the challenges of science as a whole to show how much it is a solution provider to the society. And this, there is increasing concern about the sustainability of research careers, because how come you want to become a researcher with so many challenges at the individual level, but also at the systemic level? How much are you concerned about this, and what should we do collectively?
Thank you. Let me pass that to Maria. I just pick a person to answer, but then of course maybe all can comment.
Easier question.
Can you tone it down, make it simpler?
Yes. Yeah. No, this it's a very valid concern. The precarity of careers for young researchers is very worrisome. The criteria by which they have been, they're supposed to be striving for are less attainable now than they were in the luxury time, I guess, when we all started our careers, which were, at least in retrospect, to me it seems easy. I think we have to, so we've just looked at our research assessment and changed it away from the brutal metrics, away from some of the criteria by which we were selected when it was easier to reach them. We also have to, of course, train, but maybe that's more a university question, have to be clear that being a professor is not the be-all and end-all. There are many wonderful professions out there. And actually, among the younger ones, I do see that they're very fluid in their career decisions. So I think they're doing a little bit of evolving in their outlook anyway, to the great scare, by the way, of senior researchers who can no longer find younger people to man and to woman their teams, which is just as well. Let them have smaller teams. So I think there is self-regulation at the level of the youngest who simply go into other careers until we make it more attractive again to work with them in our labs, give them more freedom, put less pressure on them.
I think this question
Whereas old ones are being trained by the young to think about what we want to do to support them.
I think all of you can have something to say about that.
Yeah.
Why not? Antoine, a quick comment from your side?
Two remarks. I think that precarity is a huge subject, and life is much more difficult for young scientists now than it was when we were, a long time ago, young scientists. But, that's my point, but if I look to France, we produce every year something like more than 10,000 or 12,000 PhD students, PhD, okay? We recruit at CNRS 250 people every year. Among them, 30% comes outside from France. So it clearly means that each PhD student will not become a CNRS researcher, and even not an academic researcher. And so we have to be very honest with the young researchers. If you do a PhD, then your options are several. University can be one, but it cannot be the only one. And so so I agree clearly that precarity is clearly a huge subject. Autonomy of the young researchers is key. But we have also the honesty to say to the young PhD candidates, it's not because you will start a PhD, it's at the end you will be a CNRS researcher.
Yeah. Anders, maybe one sentence from your side or two sentences.
Yeah, well, it's important to remember that doing a research career is an elite business. It's a business of excellence. So not everybody is suited for that. That's sort of natural law. But I think one answer to your question, which is a very good question, is not to have the researcher as an individual, to be part of a team, to have mentoring systems in place, to strive for having some sound funding system also for young researchers, and to also have the research support in place in order to facilitate the career moves of the researchers. So creating teams, I think you were saying as well, is something that is important, I think.
Thank you. We had at least 2 more questions, if I'm not mistaken. One here and then one over there. I think we'll get to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter Bauer. I was in the previous panel. It's a question about science for sustainability. And it's, you know, in the context of climate change, scientists increasingly go beyond science. So they create an information, for example, for how climate is going to change in the future, then what the impacts are going to be on society, for example. And then this is turned into an assessment of who has to pay for the bill, you know, and who doesn't. So there's a responsibility that goes beyond science, but where the scientist is essential actually for making that estimate. So it's a political responsibility, even an economical or personal responsibility. So do we prepare our scientists enough for that kind of responsibility beyond, you know, scientific, ethical principles and all that?
So whoever wants to give a short answer to that, we have one more question, and I look at the clock.
I would say that giving forecasts is also science if you have methods to do that. And you can base those forecasts on things you have, on data you have collected. So forecasting itself could be science. And the science of the future is of course more speculative than science of the past. But again, it has to do with academic integrity and to being able to draw the line where presenting data and drawing the policy conclusions are 2 different things. But I think scientists should engage in that kind of discussion and being aware of the thin line between advocating science and facts and making the policy recommendations.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, the point was, are the young people urban communities getting prepared for it? Do they understand, right?
Not just
And
the
the old
young,
people as well.
exactly.
Everybody who.
Exactly.
Right.
That's a good remark.
Good, thank you. And there was another question somewhere here. If you raise your hand again. There was one here. Well, give me a chance first in the front and then in the back.
Hello, so I'm Sagar. Oh,
Okay,
sorry.
so that's all right. Yeah, just go ahead. We get still to both questions.
Okay.
A real quick one, please.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Sagar. I'm representing here Dutch Cooperative for Education and Research, and I'm not seeking answers, but I'm seeking a validation of a question. It's much more about impact of science, or the ecological impact of science. So we do a lot of science, we do a lot of research. Is the question of impact of or ecological impact of science still relevant in the areas, especially at the European Research Council and the policy level?
Just to make sure we understand it right, you mean the impact of the very activities that science has?
Yes.
I'm taking a trip to the South Pole and then I'm leaving traces there and I have an impact on the ecosystems on the South Pole. Although I'm a scientist, I still have an impact.
Also, for example, the big technology infrastructures and for the impact of, because the ecological impact is huge.
Yeah, huge energy consumption, for
Yes.
example. Maybe this is something for an organization that runs large infrastructures too.
Clearly, there is a good way to answer your question is to stop any science. No footprint, no carbon footprint. But it's not possible. So we have to accept that science is also an investment. And on some activities, clearly, it's energy costly. And we all use supercomputers, and we need them. But clearly, what we have to do is we can decide to have supercomputers because we need them. But nevertheless, we can try to have these computers with the lowest energy consumption as possible. And that's what we try to do. If I look at CNRS, we have something like more than 1,000 labs. And if I look to electricity consumption, one lab represents 20% of all our consumption. Will we stop its activities? No, because it works on energy and probably will prepare the solutions of tomorrow. And so I think that we will have to accept that, which does not mean that we we do not have each of the lab to reduce the activity, but I would be very against a ranking of all the labs, because as you said, if we work on your South Pole, then your carbon footprint will be higher than if you work on Brussels and the Wallon-Flamand question, for instance.
Thank you. There are more questions. We cannot, I'm sorry. You got to make sure you stick with the group here and ask your question. Can we have one more question? Because she was really there from the very beginning. I sensed that. And we have to be really quick. 30 seconds and 30 seconds, and then we're done. Mic is not on.
Is it?
Yes, now it is.
So,
Thank you.
Mary Georgievska, Erasmus University in Rotterdam. I want to come back to the question, the key question of science of sustainability and then sustainability of science. I want to reflect on the first part of your debate, where I got the impression that you all said, science is good, leave us alone. But I want to ask you, from the positions you have in leading such organizations, what is the future of science? What is the sustainability of science? Because the impression I got is science is good, leave us alone.
Ooh, this is something which is hard to answer in 30 seconds with a panel of 3. But you may want to say one sentence, whatever comes to your mind. Maybe you want to start?
Let me start. I agree we may have come across like that. I think there is a core of truth in there. One has to be left alone. However, I've been thinking all this time, we're supposed to be thinking about what Europe is going to be doing in future. And why aren't we thinking about that? So I do think the element, let scientists find their way, has to remain. And if you look at, again, I don't want to harp on about the ERC, and I certainly don't take credit for it because I've been doing this for 15 years, long before I was there. They find solutions. They get the patents. The largest number of citations funded in Europe that contribute to patents are from ERC work. And this is patents for everything we're looking at, for sustainability. So we must find a way of using the mechanisms of selecting the best and doing more to get them together, and maybe having, projects on which they will get funding. I do think that element of letting the scientists do, not because everything is good, but because that's the way it works, and then channeling that in a way that the ERC has shown works, would be a good solution for the future.
Let's wrap it up with that. And you continue, please, individually with the panelists. I want to thank you for your contributions and for coming here and joining us today for this meeting. Thank you very much.